You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, the Crowne Plaza Hotel, Grand Hall, and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney, and Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and MacAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. For all your equipment needs, sales and rental, please visit MacAllister.com. We're also pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You can find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Our guest today, Julie Goodman, CEO of Arts Council of Indianapolis. Our co-host, we brought her back after a long sabbatical, Danielle Shockey, CEO, Girl Scouts of Central Indiana. We have missed her terribly, and we are so thrilled to have her on this podcast. We hope all of you are doing well in these uncertain and certainly unprecedented times. We're very grateful for Julie, and we turn it over to Danielle as always so she can have the first word, and she's going to do the 5 questions, so she's going to have the last word. Danielle, go ahead.
There's probably a joke in there, Robert, right? So, all right. So Julie, thanks for being with us today on this gorgeous sunny Wednesday in Indianapolis, and welcome to Leaders and Legends. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, good. So I hope you've taken a look at the other podcast guests. You're in great company, really great company. But today is about you and what you do with Arts Council of Indianapolis. You've been there for not a very long time. So maybe let's start with just a little bit for our audience who may not understand, one, what is the Arts Council of Indianapolis? So just some real basics around the mission, the work, if you want to get into some of the major themes of, activities that you do, but also a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Well, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I guess the first thing I should say is I was a Girl Scout. So I feel, yes. And I was a Girl Scout leader, of my daughter's troop. So thank you for what you do. And I also have a long history in public relations, Robert. So we have that in common. The Arts Council of Indianapolis is the local arts advocacy and services agency for Central Indiana. And our origin story is important, I think, for folks to understand just in terms of our relationship and our partnership with the city of Indianapolis. And the Arts Council was created in 1987. And it came from a realization in the mid-'80s that we were the largest city in the country without a local arts council. So Mayor Hudnut asked for a group of community leaders to evaluate this, to come up with some a charter and a mission for this. And in '87, the Arts Council was created. And our first responsibility was really to serve as an arm's length agency in support of the city to be able to administer public funds to the arts. So that's really the essence of our mission still to this day, is to be a partner with the city of Indianapolis in the distribution of public funds. And today that looks like the allocation of $1.4 million to 70 arts organizations in our community. So that is kind of the core of what we do. But our mission specifically states that we exist to foster meaningful engagement in the arts by nurturing a culture where artists and arts organizations thrive. And we're unique in the realm of arts agencies in that respect, that we serve both organizations and artists And we do that through the grant making that I mentioned. So in partnership with the city of Indianapolis and the annual grants program, we also operate a number of artist fellowships that are funded through private philanthropy. We have an artist services team that helps with professional development, capacity building, artist engagement. And that shows up in the community through programs like Welcome Race Fans and the Mask Up Indy commissions that we just did in partnership with the city. We have an arts education partnership with Indianapolis Public Schools that's very important to us and helps ensure that every student in our city has equitable access to arts education and experiences. We manage the public art program for the city, and so we help support the Public Art for Neighborhoods program and other public art initiatives. And the community probably knows us through the 46 for 46 mural program for the Super Bowl. So a lot of work on public art partnerships, collaborations, integration into major citywide events. And then another thing that's unique about the Arts Council is that we own and operate 2 venues. And not all arts councils have that, but we have the Arts Garden. The Indianapolis Arts Garden is owned and operated by the Arts Council, and then also Gallery 924. So it's unusual that we have venues where we can engage artists, we can present art and art experiences in the community. And those are also important. The Arts Garden in particular, in terms of our revenue and our ability to be able to support our mission. And then finally, advocacy and marketing, of course, is key to what we do.
That's a great kind of overview. And I want to actually toss it to Robert with this, with this connection, if you don't mind. So you talked about the genesis of the organization in 1987. And Robert, you always talk about on these podcasts what our city was like and what were some of these kind of catalytic changes. And so maybe for our listeners, Robert, I'm thinking, what else was happening? I mean, I think even in the history of the Arts Garden on the Arts Council, on your website, you talk about the Pan Am Games and 1980 and our city. And so Robert, maybe give some, if you don't mind, some historic context to why this fit in and how it fit in.
Well, we would need David Frick and Mark Miles and Ted Bohm and Allison Langdon and other folks who have appeared on the podcast to really give a sense of history. What they've detailed for us, and including folks like Bill Benner and others who were involved in the media or leading the city in the mayor's office or working in nonprofits, is that no city comes together like Indianapolis does. And the spirit of volunteerism, of which both of you, I'm sure, are very, very familiar, is second to none when it comes to Indianapolis and other cities. 1987, the Pan Am Games were held, and I didn't know what the Pan Am Games were. My only connection was the fact that I had to move out of my Army barracks at Fort Ben Harrison to house the athletes coming from other countries. And none of us knew why we were moving. We didn't know anything about it. But one of the points of starting my podcast was to talk to folks who've done amazing things, including talking to you, Danielle, and talking to you, Julie, and people like Ted Bohm, who oversaw the transformation of what P.E. MacAllister once called an oval in the cornfield, which was Indianapolis, into a city capable of hosting Pan Am Games, National Sports Festival, and obviously the Super Bowl. And the arts were a huge component of that. I remember seeing the Arts Garden and thinking, why is that in Indianapolis? Why is that not in, insert cosmopolitan city here? But it belongs here, and it's in terrific hands with the Arts Council. And just walking through it shows you the influence that the Arts Council has on it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Robert. I think, again, setting that context of time and place for our listeners probably helps tell the story, Julie, of really probably how far the organization has come, which was really going to be my next question. And forgive me, you've been with the organization as CEO for about 1.5 years. Is that timeline about right?
Yeah, I joined in March. March was my 1 year, and I'd been back in Indianapolis for 2 years prior to that. But I actually, I grew up in Indy. Indy is my hometown. But I actually left Indianapolis to go to school right as the Arts Council was being created. And went to Miami University and ended up in Cincinnati from there, and spent most of my professional career in Cincinnati, coming back to Indianapolis, benchmarking what was happening in Indianapolis based on some of the work I was doing there, and then had the opportunity to come back with Strata Education Network. So that's been my journey back to Indianapolis, but it's great to be home.
Well, welcome back. We're happy to have you back, and I think Robert and myself, we're all Indy natives, so it's like we're a little club here. So shifting gears just a bit.
Yeah.
So being nonprofit leaders as we are, and I think Robert introduced us both as that way, this COVID environment has created a number of challenges, but certainly one of them is being a nonprofit. And I know you've had some recent successes, and there's been some dollars that have been, frankly, earmarked for arts, which I also think is a great mark of a great city, that people remember that we need to take care of the arts as we do our youth and so forth. So talk to us a little bit about, because it's hard not to. It's hard not to talk about COVID. So talk a little bit about how it's impacted your work, how it's potentially caused you to do things a little bit differently, think about your future differently, and those dollars that have been potentially life-changing for the artists. I mean, that's certainly an employee set that could be very impacted without the nonprofit support.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's changed us. It's changed so much for everyone. But I think just going back to our mission, and this, our work to nurture a culture where artists and arts organizations thrive. I think it's just important to ground us in where we started. So, and where we are as a sector, just to help give some perspective. So before COVID, we were in an absolute renaissance in terms of arts and culture in Indianapolis, and we really were and are thriving and will again. But the nonprofit sector, which is what we represent at the Arts Council, generates $440 million in annual economic impact. We support 30,000 jobs. About half of those are independent artists and contractors and freelancers and gig workers. And then about half of those are affiliated with organizations. And then we also generate within that about 48 million in city and state revenues annually. So it's important when we talk about the impact of COVID to understand the impact in that bigger picture, in that landscape. But obviously, it, like everyone, it has been absolutely devastating. March 13th will be forever burned in my brain and my heart as the first phone call that we helped host with arts leaders, which really started us on this path of recovery and relief work with the sector. But for the Arts Council, I mean, we pivoted, like so many organizations. We pivoted, 180 in focusing our energy, our service to the sector, our service to the community against COVID relief and recovery, and then integrating that into our core work, which continues. So the first thing we did is just try to get an assessment, and being the advocacy agency for the sector, just making sure that we had a handle on the impact and had data to be able to communicate the impact. So we did we've done a number of surveys and assessments, but what all of that tells us is that by the end of June, we had experienced 20,000 event closures and cancellations in arts and culture in our city. And we know that that's now projected to be 30,000 closures and cancellations and growing by the end of September. And so when you think about that, then the cascade of all of the financial impacts what that means for our sector is that we're experiencing about $8.6 million in financial losses every month. That looks like $50 million in losses by the end of September. And then we also, through our assessment, understood that there was going to be an additional $20 million of expense, unanticipated, unbudgeted, unidentified expenses related to restart costs. So that was the landscape that we were operating from an impact standpoint. And from there, we worked with the sector. And I think, like so many things about Indianapolis, this has all been so rooted in collaboration and mind share and thought partnership with our other civic partners who were navigating this with their sectors, sharing across our civic partners, so much collaboration with the city, with our public health officials, and then importantly within the sector. So every Friday since March, that March 13th, we have been convening calls with between 80 and 100 arts leaders. And these have been conversations. They've been a community of support, of learning, of sharing, of bringing experts in, of sharing experience. So it's just been absolutely essential. And I think, again, just such a statement about our spirit and the DNA of Indianapolis. But that's definitely been a theme. But the first thing we focused on was relief, immediate relief for individuals, because through all those cancellations, employment evaporated for so many individuals in our community. And for artists and arts and culture workers, we knew that was going to be a real challenge, and we knew that it was going to take time for some of the federal support programs and unemployment and some of those benefits to come online. So we quickly worked to put an emergency relief fund in place, and by March 19th, we launched a fund thanks to the generosity of some incredible foundations that we have. There were 6 foundations that came forward with lead gifts of $50,000. The Alan Whitehill Clues Foundation, CICF was a part of that, the Crystal DeHaan Family Foundation, Ephraimson Family Foundation, Glick Philanthropies, and the Herbert Simon Family Foundation. And they helped seed a fund that would eventually grow to $475,000. So from March through early June, it was intended to be about a 3-month relief fund. We were able to distribute $500 rapid response grants to about, we made 950 grants in that period. So that was a rolling weekly cycle. And we were just trying to make sure we were getting resources out to individual artists and creatives in our community that were really struggling to make basic living expenses. And unfortunately, that is still true today. So that got us through the first 3 months. We're now actively working on replenishing that fund. So we have focused on some additional support and helping artists navigate the unemployment benefits. We know through our surveys that's just a complex system, and there just were some barriers and challenges to being even able to access the benefits that were available. We all experienced that, I think, with the PPP program too on the organization side. So just continuing to try to bring resources to the sector to help them know, make sure everyone was aware of the resources and support available, and then help navigating that and accessing that was key. A few other dimensions of relief included a partnership with the city. So the annual grants program, we worked with the city to accelerate payments. Those come online in the spring through the summer, and the city was terrific and worked with us to make sure that we could accelerate those grant payments in April. And so that was very, very helpful. And that's general operating support that was critical for our organizations. And then most recently, we are so grateful to the Lilly Endowment for supporting a fund that's the Restart and Resilience Fund. And this is specifically designed to help organizations with those unanticipated extraordinary expenses I mentioned. So this fund is really designed to help organizations adapt and reopen safely and adjust to what operations looks like in this new COVID-informed world. And it's nationally significant. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of conversations with Americans for the Arts. We are so fortunate to be able to have this level of support and helping our organizations have confidence, have hope, have support in being able to think about this pathway to reopening. And that work, that fund is now open, and we are accepting applications. But that's going to be a bit of a long journey to help all of our organizations reopen and adjust. So that work will be going on for about 18 months at least.
Wow. Again, I can't agree more how fortunate we are as a city to have so many great organizations who do support, and the philanthropy in our city is. Girl Scouts has 111 councils in the country. I can't tell you how many would, they're very envious of what we have here in Indianapolis. And I'm sure you're finding the same.
Yeah, we are very, very fortunate. So yes, it is extraordinary, and to have that, it's a $10 million fund, which is just tremendously meaningful, and yet we know we have a ways to go. I mean, this is going to be a long path to recovery. So there's more that we need to do, but that was a huge boost to the sector, and we are so grateful.
What about, so through all this, right, you talk about the sector, and similar in my space, some lessons learned, we actually hope will stay with us forever. Like, we hope we'll never go back to a place where, for our example would be Girl Scouts, that you were bound by geography, that the only expert you could hear from was one that you could go and see, right in your own community. And rather, we now have Girl Scouts who the virtual learning opportunity space has allowed them to do things like hula dancing with a teacher in Hawaii, right? I mean, so we hope to never go back again. But then there's other parts where it's like, oh my gosh, camping. It's cornerstone for a lot of families and Girl Scouts and girls, and the fact that we couldn't do that, right? So we don't want to experience that again if we can help it. So I'm curious, in the arts sector, Julie, are there some pivots that you're all thinking, wow, this is really going to change the face of arts, and we're happy? And or are there spaces in the sector where you're like, oh, this is devastating, and we have to make sure it gets back as soon as possible?
Yeah, I love that. And it's actually, I think, maybe a little similar to what you were describing. There are good things. There's a lot of innovation that is coming from this experience. There's a lot of collaboration that's coming from this. I think it's broken down. It's just brought everyone together in terms of our organizations, and helping our organization leaders get to know each other at deeper levels, understand our missions, and really rethinking mission delivery and what that looks like. Virtual content, of course, is a huge part of this. And we saw that from the very first days of this crisis, the need, the drive for artists and for arts organizations to continue to serve the community through their art, to be that source of hope and connection and inspiration. And so we, from the very first days, just tried to capture what was happening organically with this. It was a simple hashtag campaign, and it's Indy Keeps Creating. But we were trying to create a way to to be able to capture and document and share all of these amazing experiences that were starting to show up online. And so that's been really fun and inspiring to see both individual artists and how they've been doing virtual performances and how they're being supported in that, and our organizations. And so to your point, I think expanding access, reaching new audiences has been huge and a huge benefit and great learning. And I think that's what we want to hold on to, is that expanded access and the innovation and these hybrid models that are now emerging with, thanks to technology, that create a broader audience and more access to arts in our community. At the same time, I think we're all feeling the fatigue of virtual only, right? So I think it is that, like, nothing can replace live experiences, live theater, that shared experience of being in a theater with others, or in a museum environment with others, and just having those shared community experiences is irreplaceable. And I equate it to so many of us who love Hamilton. Now we can watch it in our living room, on our phone. That's amazing. But it is not the same as being in the theater and having that experience live. So I think it's very much to what you're saying, is there is good that's coming from this, and we want to hold on to that, and we will. And boy, we can't wait to be able to get back in the theater and have and in our venues and have those shared experiences together.
So I told Robert I kind of have one more, and then I'm going to let him have some space, and then I'll likely have another question or two. But thinking about our young artists and our youth in the school spaces and how different their lives look. And I have 4 daughters. Obviously, my organization represents thousands of little girls. And so how does it hurt your heart and maybe it's not, right? Maybe you love the fact that they're figuring out ways to do their orchestra practice via Zoom.
Oh.
But are you at all worried about, as they're moving to a virtual or a virtual hybrid, and they have to decide which classes have to be priority, frankly, right, at the high school? And I've heard a lot about, I don't get to do my choir class, or we're not having this class. How is the Arts Council at all involved in helping lift up that, to me, maybe potentially a new normal for the short term? Does it worry you? Do you think we'll get back to normal? It's always been kind of a challenge.
That is a huge concern. And I get actually really emotional even talking about this, because it's so important. And arts education, we're already hanging on by a thread in terms of arts education and access in our schools, and getting real estate and resources to be able to support that. It was already tough. So yes, we are very concerned, and we know it is a lifeline for these kids, and the impact that it has on their academic outcomes, on their attendance, on the socio-emotional learning benefits that it has, and especially coming out of this experience and the trauma. We don't even know yet what all of this is doing to our kids. We know what a lifeline the virtual experiences have been. And so I think right now, one of the priorities that we're working on with IPS, which in our community, again, has done such an amazing job of really jumping in and trying to close the digital divide, right? So making sure, the understanding that we're going to be in some form of virtual here for a while, making sure that we are supporting access to arts programming as a part of that curriculum. So that's one of the first things that we've been focused on, and making sure that we're supporting organizations and artists in IPS and making those connections. And then we are worried about what it looks like, and it may take some time, because so many of our experiences are about visiting artists coming into the schools, or about field trips and creating those opportunities and experiences. And we know that that's going to be challenging for a while. So I think we have a wonderful relationship with IPS. It's a strong partnership. They have a strong commitment to the arts. Alicia is on our board. We're so grateful to have the superintendent on our board. So we're hopeful, but it is an area of concern.
Thank you, Danielle. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise. It's sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, the Crowne Plaza Hotel and Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney, and Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and MacAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. And its patriarch, who passed last year, P.E. MacAllister, was instrumental in so many of the things and funding and initiatives involving the art community in Indianapolis, not to mention the Opera Awards, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Julie.
Yes.
It was quite a while ago, but I think the quote is still 100% on point. But during World War II, when Winston Churchill was asked to cut arts funding so that he could divert money to the war effort, he famously replied, "Then what are we fighting for?" As you encounter folks who may have to cut their philanthropic endeavors, how do you convince them, or how do you work with them to say, no, the arts are still very important?
Well, I think, fortunately, we haven't been confronted by that too much so far. I mean, we have a culture of support in our city where the value of arts is pretty well understood, but there it is a challenging environment, and there are a lot of competing priorities, and we know that. So I think one of the ways, it depends on who we're talking to, but I think the economic impact and reinforcing the jobs and the number of jobs that our sector represents has been important to that conversation, because there are real impacts to our city and to our economy related to the arts and specific to cultural tourism. So there's that dimension of it, but I think the other is just the intrinsic value of the arts, and that we are, as we navigate this now intersecting crisis of, the pandemic and this focus on equity and racial justice, we need the arts to help us understand and process and express and heal and come together. And I think the arts are always essential in that work, but I think right now the arts are going to be essential. They already have been through the early phases of this, but it's going to be essential for us to come together, for us to heal, for us to move forward as a community, as a city, and as a society. So I think the essence of those comments and then the quote you shared is still absolutely true.
We have a rock star nonprofit CEO as co-host, and that's Danielle. And anyone who has anything to do with the Girl Scouts now or in the past will tell you what a magnificent job she's doing. You exist in a pretty unique community. Are there other nonprofit CEOs in or out of the arts sector who you say, I'm really glad I know her or him?
Oh my goodness. Well, yes, I think the civic partnerships in Indianapolis are extraordinary. And in addition to being on weekly calls with arts leaders who I'm inspired by every day, the arts administrators in the city are extraordinary. The civic leaders we've also been having calls once a week to support and share and collaborate. And so, and a number of them are also on my board. So I have the dual pleasure of interacting with them in multiple levels. But, Visit Indy and Leonard, Michael Huber at the Chamber, Ryan Vaughn at Indiana Sports Corp, Sherry, downtown Indy, it's hard to express how important and meaningful it's been to have personal support from them and professional support, but the openness, the vulnerability, the sharing has been incredible. And one of the things that really has stood out to me, and you've probably done this, Danielle, it's just people taking time to stop what they're doing and call and check in. And so I've had that experience where some very busy people in our community just reached out to say, hey, I just want to thank you for what the Arts Council is doing. I want you to know we see you, we see what you're doing, but I just want to check in on you personally. Mm-hmm. And that it just made a huge difference. And it also reminded me of the importance of that, and for all of us as leaders right now, to make sure we're taking time to do that with our staff, with our boards, with our networks. But I think, especially as this continues, we are in this kind of long road ahead, to not lose sight of the impact that can have.
One person I want to mention, and you mentioned his name, actually I brought up to him. So do you want to give a shout out to Mr. Tony Mason from the Urban League? And maybe you two can come on one time and sing the Miami of Ohio fight song, if there is one.
Honor. Yes, we'd be happy to.
Produced some terrific people, Miami of Ohio, especially my friend Derek Ruddleman, who's an
Yes, I had the pleasure of working with Derek at Strata.
He's education expert, absolutely brilliant, and we should say condolences to Derek. It's been a few months, but he lost his wife, Shelley. Shelley was my boss when I worked at the Crowne Plaza Union Station 25 years ago, who is currently one of our sponsors.
Wonderful.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions that are a little more rapid fire, and then I'll turn it over to Danielle to finish out the podcast. So are you ready?
Ready.
If you could sing like anyone in the world, whose voice would you take?
Oh my gosh. Bernadette Peters.
Now, I would not have put that on my radar, but terrific voice, obviously. If you could play an instrument like anyone in the world, which instrument and whose talent would you take?
Oh my goodness. This is so hard because it's like asking for favorites, and I have too many.
We're a bare knuckles podcast, we don't, Julie, we don't let people slide.
I know. I'm going to stick with singers. I'm going to say Denise Graves. It's her voice and the soul of her performance It stays with me.
If you could paint like anyone in history, whose painting skills would you like to have?
Oh my gosh. I'm on a roll right now, but I'll go with Seurat.
Excellent. Your major is in your degrees in communications. And as I mentioned before the podcast, and I'll say it again, Amanda Kingsbury is a dear friend and absolutely terrific at what she does. And probably the greatest film noir expert I've ever met in my entire life. And communications is very important. Obviously, I do it for a living through Veteran Strategies, my PR company. Danielle's had to do it a lot through the Girl Scouts, and Dina Potter, her PR person, is absolutely magnificent. But when it comes to communicating your message, whether you're sitting in front of a bunch of folks whom you'd like to give money or would like to receive money, get donations from, or speaking in front of an audience, what are the key messages, not only for the Arts Council, but for you personally, that seem to make good things happen?
Well, specific to I guess the first thing to say is the heroes of our story at the Arts Council are the artists and the arts organizations of Indianapolis. So as often as possible, I hope to not be the one in front of audiences. My goal and our role is really to put forward and to amplify and elevate the amazing talent that we have in our community. And I think when we do that, that's what results in good things. So I think our number one responsibility, and it's why we're so fortunate to have Amanda, is just to continue to be relentless in building awareness and understanding and access to the artists and organizations that we have in Indianapolis. And when we do that and we build those relationships, we build those connections, we create those experiences, that translates into support and growth and expansion. And so that it's always all about the artists and the organizations that really are the engines of our creative economy.
How would you define equity in arts funding, and inclusion in arts and inclusion in arts funding? You mentioned the wonderful Superintendent Alicia Johnson from my alma mater, Indianapolis Public Schools. And she's made it her mission, one of her missions. And I remember art class in IPS, mostly because my next door neighbor and I had a paste eating contest, I think almost every day. And maybe that explains a few things. But what it doesn't explain is how arts somehow, in the pantheon, the litany of things that get emphasized with education, a lot of it's technical and a lot of it's science and math. But I wouldn't even call it a softer skill, because it's not. But the arts can get lost in the shuffle. How important is it for you to have a voice like Superintendent Johnson's associated with yours? And how would you define those two things?
Well, the Arts Council just a few years ago adopted a new equity statement and actually revised our funding guidelines around our equity priorities. And it is about access and equitable access to resources, equitable access to funding. And that starts with awareness of just making sure that we have relationships with all artists in our community, that they're all aware of the programs and services and the funding that's available, that we have an equitable process to administer those funds. So the umbrella over all of that is a statement that we believe Indianapolis is a city that can and should deliver on the promise of a full creative life for all. And so that's kind of a governing belief that, and a filter that we put up against every decision that we make, every priority that we set, every program and process that we operate. And we're on that journey, like so many organizations right now, to do more, better, and faster. We've made a lot of progress, but it's not enough. And so I think it's also, in terms of access, making sure that the arts are integrated into our community. And you spoke about it related to education, and it's very important to have those specific experiences in education, but also for it to be integrated into the educational experience. And Alicia, I know, believes that her kids go to Edison and have that experience of an arts integrated experience, where arts is part of the humanities, it's part of science, it's part of how they're helping kids learn all of the disciplines. And I do think that isn't adopted everywhere, but it is a movement that is underway, and it's important. And we have great examples of that here in Indianapolis. And the other is just access and inclusion, is making sure that our artistic experiences, our products, our programs reflect our whole community and all residents that we serve, all visitors that we engage. And so there's a lot of intention and work around diversity and equity in staffing, in board representation, in casting, in programming. And again, we're seeing tremendous intention and investment and care being put on this, and there's much more work that we need to do. But it's all of that. And actually, it's been really inspiring that through this process, going through the recovery process with the sector, we've created a recovery guide on reopening, and created some really deep resources for the sector around COVID-related reopening. But now we're talking as a community, as an arts community, about how do we take this structure, these forums that we've created, this community of trust and support that has been created through this, and apply that to advance these equity and inclusion and diversity goals together. So that's really the next phase of this work together, is to accelerate that, but do it in a more unified way.
Thank you for that. I know it's kind of an open-ended question, but I know it's an important message for the Arts Council and you personally. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to articulate it.
Thank you.
Danielle, take us home.
All right. And as I always do to you, Robert, I have to insert one more before the last five. So Julie, Girl Scouts across the country has 4 pillars. One of them is STEM, one of them is outdoor adventure, entrepreneurship. And if you were talking to our national organization and 112 Girl Scout CEOs, what case would you make for the insertion of the A into STEM? And for those that don't know what I'm talking about, STEM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But oftentimes we get the question, where's the A? Where's the arts integration? And why does Girl Scouts not insert the A, making it STEAM?
Well, I love you for asking that. And I would love to help make that case. It's because the A is the amplifier for all of the other disciplines. I mean, the A creates pathways for learning and understanding and engagement. It helps address the whole child, the whole people. We all learn differently, and that creates pathways and engagement and opportunities for all of those disciplines to be more successful. and to have better outcomes. And there is so much science to use that. There's so much science and data around that now, that I would love to take that on with you, and we can have more discussion, because of my goodness, the Girl Scouts should include the A.
And I'd like to say, I think most people would say we include the A a lot across all 4 of our pillars.
Yes.
But I think people are still looking for that very codified STEAM versus STEM.
Yes.
So had to ask. All right, the final 5 questions. Final 5 questions, Julie. And these are also fast, rapid fire.
Oh, okay. I'll do my best.
First thing that comes to mind.
All right.
These are easier than Robert.
But Julie, every guest gets the same 5 questions. You're not going to be graded, but you're answering the same questions that Angela Brown did, and Mitch Daniels and Ted Boehm, and so you will not be graded.
Got it.
All right. So what was your first job?
Teaching swimming lessons in my backyard.
Entrepreneur, and you were at the beginning, right? It sounds like. What was your first concert?
Oh my gosh, Donnie and Marie with my dad, Market Square Arena.
I hope you haven't gotten him a Father's Day card
And
since.
he took the binoculars right at the moment where he was showing his purple socks. Totally dates me, but there it is.
That's not Danielle. I have to think back, but we've heard that one before.
I was going to ask you, Robert. You have a good mental catalog of these responses.
Well, so does Chris Spangle, and we have a special shame category for concerts.
I might be entered. Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, number 3. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, what book would that be?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to fail on that because there's too many. Come back to me.
Let's put it a different way. What was the last book you read that really had an impact?
Well, I'm rereading it right now. It's not the best book, but it's a really good one. It's Good to Great for nonprofits. And also, I think, and you'll probably appreciate this, Simon Sinek, and It Starts With Why is also one that I lean on a lot. Those are professional, but that's kind of what I've been looking at recently.
Okay. There's no bad answer. So I don't think he has a shame list there, Robert. You can't judge people's literary choices.
No, I won't. We'll notice that there's no H in your STEM for history, but
yeah. And I'll be hearing from my friend Kira on that. I obviously need to make time for a book club somewhere in here. Yeah.
I wouldn't mess with Kira.
I know.
Studs. I would do as she asks. Go ahead, Danielle. I'm sorry.
All right, it's okay. If you could witness any event in history, be there as it happened, what event would you have chosen?
Oh, is this past? You know what? Can I make it a future event, and can I make it around the eradication of systemic racism in our society? So,
all right. I'm not the rule maker, so Robert,
inspired by what's happening in our city, and thinking a lot about that right now.
Absolutely. It will hopefully be history soon, right? Behind us.
Well, hopefully we'll see significant progress in our lifetime, but I think we're in an extraordinary moment to see some real movement on this. I hope so.
Well, then your answer for number 5 might be linked. I'll be curious. The 5th question is, if you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, just a chat, who would you choose?
Well, I would have said Toni Morrison, but she's no longer with us. So today, right now, I'll say Michelle Obama.
Okay. Well, Julia,
she's been popular. Not Barack Obama's been, I think, probably the most frequently cited dinner guest. I'd have to check with Chris, but he's got to be 1 or 1A.
Mm-hmm. And I guess I'll go back to the book and say Beloved. That's one that was that's really special for me. So.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmong Construction, the Crowne Plaza Hotel and Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the law firm of Bose, McKinney, and Evans, and the Bose Public Affairs Group, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and MacAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been Julie Goodman, President and CEO, Arts Council of Indianapolis. Our co-host has been Danielle Shockey, CEO, Girl Scouts Central Indiana. Thank you both so very much for coming on the Leaders and Legends podcast. We enjoyed the conversation very much. And thank you both for what you do, especially when it comes to keeping our kids mentally healthy and happy during this very difficult time in our classrooms. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.